Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here. Dr. Bones has a criticism of Ayn Rand that does not even rise to the level of a child scribbling on a wall with crayons. What a moron. Let's see what they have to say here. This guy's not Dr. Bones. This guy is some guy who's doing a podcast. We'll see Dr. Bones in a second. He has a hammer and sickle across his face. He's wearing sunglasses and a hat. He's disguising his personality. He probably is a thug, and he probably should be in prison. He has about the IQ of the average prison population. Right now, this guy is going to ask us, at what point does selfishness turn into capitalism? And then he holds up a book here by Stirner. Now, Stirner is apparently somebody who's into some sort of selfishness. Is he the self-ownership guy? Or he's an anarchist of some kind or some stripe? And when do you cross a line and you say a person should be out there doing the right thing and doing what's good for themselves, and then bam, you're in capitalism? And at what point does selfishness turn into capitalism? Now, old Knucklehead has an answer. We're going to hear him out in just a second here. His answer is the minute that it's defined by class. So Ayn Rand was able to turn selfishness into capitalism by defining class, by defining it through class. He says the minute that self-interest is limited to one class, she never includes the self-interest of the workers. What? She never includes the self-interest of the workers. She just built up this system where these industrialists and these brilliant people who are at the top of society do their thing. Her philosophy wasn't for the workers, he says. So, we'll talk about how stupid they are in just a second. We'll let them have their say.
Turn into this.
The minute it's defined by class, the minute self-interest is limited to one class. You'll notice in Ayn Rand's writings, she never includes the self-interest of the workers. She builds up this gigantic mythos about these supposedly self-created industrialists and shit like that. And it's interesting because she's a fucking bullshit fiction writer, so she can literally just pull characters out of her rotten...
And then he displays his IQ. She never is concerned with the selfishness, the welfare of the workers. Is that right? Well, what about society collapsing? Is that not bad for the workers? What if society were to go on successfully? Would that not be good for the workers? So, I couldn't get my head around I couldn't off the top of my head get my head around an area in any of her books or essays that would apply to this. So I went and got For the New Intellectual and The Virtue of Selfishness off the shelf, and I just thumbed through them for a while. And I was just sort of, thinking what sort of a quote would apply here? And I was thinking of some sort of a quote, and maybe you ladies and gentlemen can remember some quote like this that says something like, even the lowliest industrial worker has benefited more by this, or something like that. There's something somewhere in one of her essays or something. Maybe The New Left, the Anti-Industrial Revolution or something. But what I did notice as I was going through and just looking, I just skim a paragraph or two, skip a few pages, read a paragraph, skip a few pages, see if I could find anything, read the first sentence of a paragraph. What did I find in there? It seems to me that she is addressing any human being with a mind of their own, saying that they should think for themselves. And thumbing through both of these books and various essays in both of them, and paragraph after paragraph, essay after essay, time after time, she seems to be saying the individual has a mind of their own and they should think for themselves. Now you should judge for yourself. You go read and see if you can find where she either talks about the top classes or something like that, the non-working class, I guess, or where she talks about neglecting the working class, or talks in some way that would neglect the working class. Nothing in here would or does neglect the working class. None of it even mentions class. So that goes to my next point. How utterly confused he is. Starting with the wrong philosophy, going forward with completely incorrect ideas, he cannot even read Ayn Rand. Because he keeps reading going, "What? He doesn't say anything about the workers. He said industry, but no workers. Ah!" He mentions industry, mentions profit. No workers. Ah! Where's the workers? So he can't even think correctly because of his base philosophy. This is how dangerous philosophy is if it's taught wrong. If you teach the wrong philosophy systematically over years to people, they can get to a very dangerous point where you can't even reach them. And I think that this guy, maybe as a function of his IQ and his education level, is not going to be reachable. He's clearly about as dumb as a post. Now, at 3 minutes and 23 seconds, he says something that's sufficiently stupid that I wrote idiot in capital letters here in my notes. We're at 3 minutes and 4 seconds, so we're going to play the video forward. I'm going to do a thumbs up when I tell you that 3:23 is here, and we got to listen carefully.
That the only way the modern state could exist, the only way that the ruling classes could exist, was if the laborers, if the common people were tricked into their self-interest denied. So while
the only way the modern state could exist is if the laborers were tricked and their self-interest was denied. So, if the self-interest of the workers would have been taken into account, then how would the world look? Now, I consider myself a worker because I make approximately average or below average, probably below average. I don't know what the average in America is anymore. But I'm not too far above or below the average. So I'm probably a worker, a middle class. Shit, what is the average? I don't know. Maybe I'm a bit below average. I'm certainly not too far above average if I am above average. So I'm in the lower half of society, of America. I'm certainly not wealthy. So what would it look like? Here I am sitting at my desk with a computer there and a computer there and a computer in my pocket and a computer in the other room. How would and a car outside, and my wife's got her car at work, and I'm going to take my car, and how would the world look if workers were taken into account, if they hadn't been robbed in order to build capitalism? What the hell would the world look like? Makes you wonder. All this robbery that we've seen, the destruction and robbery he speaks of that has built capitalism, and there he is on a computer in a heated room in perfect safety, imagining he's under some sort of danger. He may be. He's probably an illegal thug of some kind. What an idiot.
Rand is going on about the self-interest of the business people, of the supposed entrepreneurs. She completely disregards and imagines that the self-interests of the workers don't exist.
No, she does not disregard or imagine that it doesn't exist. She doesn't separate the self-interest of the workers from anybody else. The workers are not different from anybody else. The workers are people with minds. And she is addressing any human being who has a mind in these books. You judge for yourself. You go read them for yourself. Don't take that guy's word for it. She does not address workers or intellectuals, or she addresses specifically people who want to be a new type of intellectual. And the funny thing about that book is you would say, oh, she's just for the hoity-toity intellectuals. No, actually that book seeks to bypass intellectuals and makes fun of them and says that intellectuals today are rotten and the field of intellectual endeavors today is terrible and in awful shape. So be the new intellectual. All right, so he's an idiot for thinking that Rand doesn't take care of the various classes in her philosophy. She only looks at some of the classes. Well, there are not classes. So it would be insane to take account of something that doesn't exist. Classes are something that are hammered, riveted on to society by people who are not very good at thinking, people like this. And you have to be very careful and build society in a civil way and in a mutually agreeable way, and that way you can have law. Otherwise, you just have people with guns running around killing each other, which is what Soviet Russia was like. How funny that he would have that on his face. So no, she does not ignore the working class. But Soviet Russia sure did, right? Soviet Russia didn't give a goddamn about the working class. They put them into a meat grinder on a daily basis to pay basic bills. Do you know who to? The capitalists. The slave factories they ran producing iron ore, wood, and gold bullion for the international market. Those slave factories, they sold those goods internationally to get money from the capitalists. Soviet Russia literally liquidated its population to produce things for the capitalist economies of the world. Actually true. They actually treated their people like money. They actually liquidated them for money. He's wearing the symbol of that country. And he's telling us that Ayn Rand doesn't take account of the various classes in society. Ayn Rand doesn't take account of classes in society because every member of any given class, whatever a class would be, has a mind of their own. She's addressing anybody who has a mind of their own. Possibly not this guy.
So, yeah.
But it's so much worse than that, Dr. Bones.
Of course it is.
As an Ayn Rand scholar.
Oh, God.
Well, you know, it's actually, like, as a joke, I initially linked my page to... If
we
you
can
call,
skip a bit.
It says call now and you'll pick up the Ayn Rand Institute. I always thought that was a nice, funny joke.
That's rude of you.
Are objective, and they're not subject to dispute.
That is the biggest load of horseshit. Yeah, the whole idea that any kind of morality or ethics is objective, like...
Wait! The whole idea that any kind of morality is objective, that's a whole load of bullshit, he says. Wow! Well, let's see. So let's say I posit an idea about ethics. What would he say? He would obviously make some sort of an argument against it. He would point to things in reality which prove that my argument for an objective reality is incorrect. What would he point to? Objective facts in reality. Therefore, morality and ethics must be subject to analysis by the objective facts of reality, obviously, or he wouldn't even be able to judge the matter. So for him to say that he can objectively judge ethics, and ethics cannot be objective, is very strange, isn't it? In what way did you judge them? Through what analysis? So, if they have nothing to do with reality, they are not statements of science, they are not statements of fact, they are totally arbitrary, in what way do you come to that conclusion? Because then there must be something out there that is objective and is not arbitrary. So you've got to make up your mind. Are ethics arbitrary? Or are they objective? If you say that they're arbitrary, on what grounds do you say that they're arbitrary? On some objective grounds, I presume. Well, give me the objective grounds. No, everything's arbitrary. You can't prove anything. It's all floating. It's all nonsense. So, it's hard to make a coherent argument against somebody who isn't using any given idea linked to any other idea. None of his ideas are linked. None of his ideas are built on any other idea. It's not coherent. We have a word for that when your ideas are linked and coherent. We call it integrated. He is not linking his ideas up. His ideas aren't coherent in a set, and he has no integration in his ideas or philosophy. So how do you argue against a guy who has just about the IQ of a mayonnaise jar? What do you say to somebody that's that stupid? Well, should we go on to 4:59? We get to skip ahead 30 seconds, and we should skip every single bit we can.
Show that the majority of people are actually totally 100%.
The majority of people are actually totally 100% irrational. Now, we've all heard this. People are actually irrational. People are not rational. We've heard the Kantians go on about this nonsense, haven't we? Should we just have Mr. Cropper debunk all those people and all those books and all those videos that they've done? Should we just do that right now? Mr. Cropper, just put all those sons of bitches to bed right now? All right. Might as well do it. The majority of people are irrational. He gives us evidence. So should we address his evidence? We can go off any way we want to, but let's address his evidence. The stock market is affected by the weather. All right, on a rainy day, it behaves differently than on a sunny day. Okay, people are irrational. We know this because the stock market is affected by the weather. Okay, now if that's not transparently stupid, if that's not a really stupid argument, then you're probably not a leftist. If you think that that is maybe I said that backwards. If that's not transparently stupid, if you think that's convincing, then you're probably a leftist. Okay? If you can see through that, then you're probably an objectivist or you're rational. Why would it be that the stock market behaving differently on a rainy day means people are irrational? Because why would the stock market why would be affected by rain? I don't know. Because people don't go out as much when it rains. Because people go out more when it rains. Because people go out to eat more when it rains. Because people go to the movie when it rains. Because people read books more when it rains. Because people drink more hot cocoa when it rains. And therefore they're checking their stocks less. Okay? How does this prove irrationality? Try again. But we can talk more about it. There is a guy who I'm going to do some videos on. Oh boy, who is it? I can't remember his name at the moment. And one of the things that he talks about is if you're standing in a battle line and there are 10,000 of you facing the army that's coming. Now, if one of you runs, if you yourself run, and all the 9,999 stay, then you'll live, right? Now, if all 9,999 of them make that calculation and they all run, then the horses are going to catch them and kill a lot of them, right? So, if all of them make that calculation, etc., etc., so they make these scenarios like that. So they also make scenarios like that in a theater. There's a fire. Do I get up and run out? Or do I walk slowly so that I don't trip or hit somebody else and then we both fall and then we get run over? But I should run, right? Because if I don't run, then the thing will be blocked before I get there. So then people start behaving irrationally and it causes a disaster. And therefore this proves that people are irrational. In the case of the battle, in the case of the army thing, he's forgetting the context in which this occurs, right? These people aren't just standing on this hill waiting for an army coming at them with no context at all. They haven't been brought through a Craigslist ad over to this field to stand here on this embankment facing this enemy army because this stupid professor wanted to do a thought experiment. That is not why that army is standing there. That army is standing there either because the British are invading or because the Persians are invading. Let's do that one. That army is standing there because the Persians are invading. Now we have a new context. Now we can actually talk about it. He's talking about it as if it were in a vacuum. What does that individual decide with that army facing them and behind him he can run and is everybody else going to stay there and all that? In a vacuum, he tries to judge it. Well, let's forget the vacuum scenario. Let's look at a real world scenario where they were facing an army that was going to run them down. We know about Sparta and the 300. Now, why didn't any of them run? Well, it's irrationality, right? No, because they had a law. It was against the law for them to run. Okay? So they stood there and they died, and now we can go and see the inscription that says, O stranger passing by, go tell the Spartans that here obedient to their laws we lie. Because it was illegal for them to turn their back on the enemy, so they had to fight and die there. And then later there was a battle at Marathon. And there were the Greeks facing the Persians. The Greeks were afoot, and the Persians were on horseback, or they had horses. They had cavalry. And what happened in that situation? Did a few of them scatter and break and run to the back? No! The whole goddamn lot of the Greeks broke and ran forwards into the enemy. They rushed at their enemy. Okay, and they were outnumbered 2-1 or 3-1 or something like that. And they beat the shit out of the Persians. They drove them into the sea. They slaughtered them. So there are two different battles that you could look at. Or you could analyze this other battle where they're all standing there in a vacuum and one of them could turn and run or not. When you analyze things in that way and then you think you've proven that people are irrational, your proof is as good as your example, you stupid morons. And his proof that the stock market going up or down differently depending on the weather, proving that people are irrational? Again, your proof is as good as your example, you stupid moron.
Fucking irrational. In fact, they've found that the weather conditions for a certain day can affect the New York Stock Exchange. Literally, these people's emotions overriding every bit of knowledge and empirical data they've managed to cram into their balding, horrible, reflective skulls.
See, so he says if people were rational, then they would do the same thing because, and there he gives his premise, because their actions are based on their knowledge. That's why. So when he finds a place where their actions aren't based on their knowledge, all of a sudden people are irrational. So on a rainy day, since they're at a restaurant with their wife, instead of looking at the stock exchange, and therefore there's less trading, and it behaves differently, therefore people are irrational. Alright? Now anybody who's convinced by his line of argument there is as dumb as he is, and you're welcome to it, you fucking morons. The rest of us can see right through this stuff.
It's all fucking garbage. It's all fucking... And the sheer idea that competition somehow creates the most beneficial... She imagines this world where monopolies don't exist, and the sheer fact that she mentioned mutualism, the few mutualists I do know and that I have read, such as Kevin Carson, absolutely spit on Ayn Rand and everything she fucking stands for.
Then there
if you Google objectivism, it says the definition of objectivism is a philosophy that the belief that certain things, especially moral truths, exist independently of human knowledge or their perception of them.
Is it true that moral truths exist independently of human knowledge or their perception of them? Yes, that's true. It doesn't matter whether or not I know about the dangers of radiation, let's say, right? Or poison ivy, right? Doesn't matter whether I know about those. Now, if I do know about radiation, let's say the danger of radiation, if I know how dangerous that is, then I can do scientific experiments, my knowledge can grow, and I can use radiation to do x-rays and to treat cancer. But just on the surface, if I don't know about the dangers of radiation, then I might take a certain type of rock and I might make a colorful orange plates and cups out of it. And then I would be poisoned by radiation from uranium in my house. So it's true that ethical and moral truths are independent of your knowledge of them. That is true. And for them to doubt that is just shows how low IQ and how uneducated they are, I reckon. But so the definition of objectivism here is going to throw him for a total loop, because now he believes that ethically the good has to exist independently somehow, somewhere. So he immediately takes objectivism to mean Platonic realism. That's how stupid he is. He has nothing else in his mind. He's so uneducated that that's all he could think of when we say that the good exists independently of your judgment. He thinks there is therefore a floating form of the good somewhere. He couldn't even conceive of the argument I just gave, that uranium is unhealthy for you whether or not you know about it. No, he skips immediately to Platonic realism. Watch this.
Independently of human knowledge, like the idea that good is some physical force out there in the universe that, like, one day we're gonna land a fucking rocket ship on and touch?
Thinks it's way out there in outer space, too, the good. No, the good is the fact that uranium will kill you unless you know exactly how to use it, in which case it might save your life. And that is independent of whether or not you actually know or understand uranium. Those things are true of uranium, that it could kill cancer cells if you did X to it. That's true whether or not you know that. And the fact that it'll kill you is true whether or not you know that. So the good and ethical truths are independent of your knowledge. You have to go discover them. So he thinks that we're going to have to take a rocket ship and go land on it someday. Okay? His IQ goes down every second that we investigate this nonsense. Can we skip a bit? We're going to skip to 7:15. We're going to let him display his IQ the way that a peacock displays its feathers.
I mean, let's look at the brass tacks of what Ayn Rand really was about.
Let's look at the brass tacks of what Ayn Rand was about. He says Ayn Rand because he doesn't know anything. It rhymes with mine. It's Ayn Rand. Rhymes with mine. Now then, the brass tacks. Good. Let's get down to something substantive. Now, he's either going to address her metaphysics, which says that reality exists and we have to start there as an axiom, right? Or he's going to address her epistemology, which says that reason is the way that we know reality, and that reason is our primary means. There's no other means. We can't get it through inspiration or drugs. It has to be reason. Now that's metaphysics or epistemology. Now if he's not going to go that deep, he might talk about her ethical view, that a person should always be interested in what they want. And if that's what he's going after, her ethical view, that would be interesting. He might also go after her politics, and he would say that a person should always go after what they want, selfishness, in the political realm, which is just one step above ethics. Well, let's see. What does he go after? What's the real brass tacks? What's he really talking about? What's Ayn Rand really talking about? What does he think that Ayn Rand is really about? Let's see.
Basically founded a little cult, to where she tricked her, then lover into allowing her to fuck someone else. And then the minute that the person she was fucking then decided to fuck someone else, Ayn Rand had a problem with it, so then she...
Oh, drama. So that's his appreciation of Ayn Rand. Ayn Rand is one of the most important philosophers in the history of the world. She's certainly the most important philosopher being studied today. She is the most important philosopher that we have since Aristotle. And if you're going to study any philosopher at all, you should study Ayn Rand. And you can study others. You can study dozens of others. But you should study Ayn Rand. Otherwise, you'll be a fucking moron like this guy. You don't want to be a moron, do you? You want to be cool like Mr. Cropper, right? So study your Ayn Rand so you don't look like an idiot, boys and girls.